Hi everyone, my name is Sue Firth and I'm a business psychologist. I'm an expert in stress and resilience, and if you haven't come across me before, you'll find quite a lot of information all about me on LinkedIn and also my site, www.suefirthltd.com. So how are you all doing? I am finding this is such an unprecedented time, and I'm also particularly finding that when I talk to my clients, many of them are struggling. So I thought that I would try and see if I could help. This is a short video I've recorded, and I'm going to share the screen with PowerPoint in the background so that I can go through a few tips and pointers and hopefully offer you something of use. So if I just share the screen quickly, you should spot that I've dropped up to the right-hand side. Now, when it comes to COVID-19, I don't know how you're feeling, and I quite appreciate the fact that it must be completely abnormal. But we're now a month in, and to some degree, I think we are getting used to certain elements of it. But the first thing perhaps to think about if you yourself are struggling is a few things that humans need. Now, one of them is the top, which is to be in control. And I would agree with you if you're already thinking this is the last thing that you have right now. Now, the second thing that we need, though, is to be connected with other people. And I think the third is to feel really productive. So part of the problem, but also part of the solution, I guess, is that you've always had control in the past, and right now this seems to have been taken away from us. So funnily enough, my advice, although it seems counterintuitive, is actually to try to let go, because the more that you struggle to grip onto this situation, the more difficult that can be. And I think you then prevent yourself from being able to cope with the stress that's connected to that. So part of my suggestion is to try to let go of some of that pressure and that desire, because if you do so, it's actually still possible to stay connected, particularly to your friends, to your family, to the things that have always been important to you. And I still think it's possible to be productive. So 2 out of 3 of these is still potentially possible. But let's take a look at the reason why it's frustrating and why it's causing us so much stress, first of all. Well, I think the first thing is that I've already said at no other time in our lives has our sense of control and choice ever been taken away from us like this. And there's some security in that, bizarrely, because often when we are struggling, if we get precisely told what we can and can't do, there's often something of a relief in that. But not so much for business leaders. We're not getting the answers that we need right now. And I think answers, solutions, ideas, so that we can plan are part of what we do on an everyday, weekly basis. And planning and also goal setting is second nature to us. So that's one of the reasons why I think business leaders are struggling. Now, another one is possibly because our homes are usually places where we go in order to be able to relax. And that's actually minimum activity, with the possible exception of getting ready to go and exercise or be with your family and sit and watch television. So now instead, we're expecting you all to gear up and actually work in them. And also, I think there's quite an important point here, which is about the fact that because you're no longer commuting, you probably used the commute on the way to work in order to drive that energy up and focus on your day. And you probably used the commute when you were coming back from work in order to decompress and then come back down. And now you're not being given the luxury of that either. So what's going on? Well, my feeling is that I've actually called it something, and I'll be introducing that to you in a second. But if you therefore look at this graph that I've attempted to draw, now I'm not a graphic artist, so you'll probably laugh when you see this in a minute. But over time, I think it's quite possible that in any one day, which is what you can see illustrated down here, your mood is bound to go up and down. And this is a case in point, and it happened to me. And I'm finding when I share this that it's happening to a lot of people. First and foremost, you might start out the day feeling pretty good. You might even be positive, and that's really quite a plus. But something happens during the course of the day. In my case, it was because I tried to see whether or not I could get together with my son, who was being in lockdown with my ex instead. And actually the answer was no, and I realized it wasn't very feasible. And despite the fact that he's nearly 20 and his birthday's coming up, I couldn't help it. I dropped down really quite low. Within a fairly short length of time, I came back up. I maybe went and got the exercise that I needed, a bit of a break and a bit of a change. And I think I found the next best thing to get on with, and that picked my mood up. But then we get told that we've gone back into lockdown for 3 further weeks. And if you're anything like me, you find then that your mood begins to dip, and it takes quite a lot of effort and energy to now drive this mood back up. So I have nicknamed this the Concertina effect. And I think this, strictly speaking, is exactly what it's going to feel like, this kind of concertina of up and down. And really, in some ways, the gaps between those shifts up and down is really quite short. And this is why I've drawn a few fairly essential conclusions. Number one is that if you're anything like me, the dip between one concertina and the next concertina is really very short. The second is that we might actually benefit ourselves, therefore, if we cut ourselves a bit of slack and learn to expect that we are going to feel this, but also that this might be going on for longer than we thought. Where we thought maybe the first 3-week dip might actually result in something really remarkable or maybe observable, in actual fact, it's relatively minimal from the point of view that we have now been put into lockdown again, and it is in all likelihood that things will not in any way go back to some kind of norm. Instead, I think what we might have to do is constructively go forward and start to think about how things are going to look then, and put our energies into what our businesses could do in order to respond to that. This is what I would call the new norm, rather than going back to our comfort zone. Now, I don't know whether or not you have thought through how to alter or lessen these dips, but I think some of the conclusions might be in reminding you about the change curve. Now, if you remember this, the change curve describes how initially we go through quite a lot of change as human beings when we are first told something quite traumatic or shocking. And I think you could argue that this whole process, because of the speed with which it's happened to us, and there is no precedent for this, there's no template. There's nothing that any of us have done, with the possible exception of a disaster strategy, which might be fire or flood before now. But many of us have not experienced anything like this, and we are experiencing it in such volume or numbers that actually it also can sometimes feel like there's almost nowhere to go. But when you look at the change curve, let's just remind ourselves of that. You initially can go through a sense of denial, which is, why is this happening and it can't be happening to me? It can't be that bad. It can't surely mean that things are going to change for the long term. And what that results in eventually is a sense of frustration, but a reality check somewhere down the bottom where your mood starts to dip until you decide. And this period of time is very different for each individual and also each individual business. But until and when you decide that things improve, and at that stage it begins to result in experimentation and possibly a sense of decision making around the fact that you're feeling a renewed sense of energy, and you can drive your energy levels and productivity back up with it. But that is by no means a quick process, and that's really my point. I think if you now look at the concertina effect for business instead, we have swapped from hours within a day to days within a week, or even several weeks, or even several months. And I think that would seem much more realistic to me. So when you now look at the ups and downs that formulate the concertina, in actual fact, we're looking at how productive we feel over time. And that whilst you may start, say on a Monday, feeling like you're in pretty good space and you're coping, unfortunately, you may then find some sort of information or a government statement alters your plans. And in that given moment, you begin to dip. It's quite understandable that you would dip, because I would say again, this is not an easy time to navigate, and please try and cut yourself some slack. It is by no means obvious what our solution or resolution needs to be, and many of us, having been business leaders for many years before now, are extremely used to being with the answers, to having the answers, and indeed everybody relies on us to have the answers. But what you then might find is that if you can get your head around, how does my business look now? How could my business look now? You can press the reset button. And then if we apply the change curve and its drive back up and use the same words or terms, we would now say, in all likelihood, you're going to experiment with what that reset looks like. Could we be leaner? Could we be different? Could we still operate and function and produce well and actually manage to thrive? But in all likelihood, it's only fair to say it's unlikely that we're going to manage to thrive yet. Instead, it seems much more reasonable that when something comes along again which alters your plans, and in all likelihood it might do, that you're going to need to reset and set the reset button again. And that the reset button is the process of deciding, much as this concertina effect in reality is likely to play out and effect, that you are, instead of going to automatically be able to come back up and therefore look further at thriving, it's quite possible that it's far more realistic that you will travel in almost a weekly basis between coping, something changes, reset, experiment, cope, reset, experiment, and so forth, in which case it will feel like you're going backwards and forwards. So a second concertina is even happening at the same time. So not only are you going up and down in mood, but also what will feel like backwards and forwards. And this is a little bit like the retrograde motion of the planets. Now, what is it that you think you need? Well, some of you, as I'm smiling when I say it, will think you need this. And I can understand that only too well. And in fact, probably on a daily basis, I'm treating myself to at least a single one of these. But the bad news is if you're going to look like this, then unfortunately, you may not be solving your problem. Now, I don't know that I've necessarily got all of the answers, but I do think I've got a few to offer you. It's possible that what you really need instead is for me to gently say to you, this is okay. But equally, try very hard not to get completely stuck, please. If you get stuck or you freeze, which is a term in relation to the stress response, that rather than fight or flight, you're actually freezing, then you will know it. Because you will find that you lock up, you get overwhelmed, you're not coming up with the answers. And at that time, please realize it is a perfectly normal reaction to a very unprecedented situation. At that time, what you're likely to need is some antidotes or outlets for stress. You can get these in one of two ways, and this is some of my suggestions. You may have very good ones you're already using of your own. Antidotes for stress are made up of both an outlet, so that you actually get the opportunity to download, but also an upload. That means being able to absorb fresh information or valuable input. So some of those suggestions are here. First of all, I think if you've hit the overwhelm button, then take a walk. Break the struggle energetically with that difficulty in your mind. Because if you go off and do something else for a little while, you've possibly even forgotten the benefit of doing this. But going for a walk, going for a run, whatever it is that you do, just for a few minutes even, is likely to break that incredibly difficult process we go through where the frontal lobe of the brain just shuts down and you cannot come up with the answers. When you come back and you're feeling a little bit more inclined because you have pressed the reset button, you are ready to reach out, you want some answers, maybe you just want a sounding board because you've already got an idea, or maybe you really do need input from people. Your peers are going through this too. Many of you are already members of organizations for which you will be able to get incredible value. I'm sure you know what those are, and if you're already a member, reach out to them. We have several forums for those, and they are truly valuable because the input and experience of somebody who may have been through something at least approximating this could be quite considerable right now. The online resources that the government is offering are actually pretty user-friendly, even if they will take you some time to complete the relevant forms. And you can feel pretty tired and exhausted by the time you've made all of that effort. So choose the right time of day to do that. And don't have unreasonable expectations about how much you actually get done in any one day anymore. You used to run around like a mad person. You used to feel that that was contingent or related to your productivity. Now it's possible that you may have to manage your expectations, get less done, but get it done well. Don't forget the support, and the presence of your friends and family. These are incredibly important, and they are amongst the things that have always mattered. So I would still ask you to consider those as being not only important, but also leave them in place. Because I think if you do, and you engage, and you still allow time for all of the things that you've always enjoyed, you might be quite surprised at how much relief that also gives you. It breaks the struggle and gives you a change, but also gives you back your energy levels and your ability to think straight. I think using weights and exercise and cycling and running, these are all vital right now, not least because we've been given permission to go out once a day, but also because they ease that stress. Again, many of you may have been used to doing this at a certain time of day and then set up your day. In fact, you may be better if you swap that out towards the end of the day now and use different types of exercise to de-stress. So for example, exercise and running will dissipate all of that tension from the muscles. A consistent structure and the routine of getting up each day, pushing yourself to go to a designated space or place where you work is very essential so that you can get into that focused business mode. I would not recommend, unless you're finding it particularly useful, to work on the kitchen table alongside of the rest of the family. You might find it particularly difficult to still take phone calls or still make them or just be in your own zone. So whilst I'm not a walking advert for anything from some of the online organizations, I would still recommend get yourself some headphones which actually cut out all ambient noise. They can be hugely useful at a difficult time like this. So what have I said in a nutshell? I think what I've said is cut yourself some slack, be kind to yourself. You've always been a good leader before, you've got the same skill set and you're the same person now, but you're also allowed to be human. It's quite possible that you will therefore get overwhelmed even on an occasional basis. And if that's how it's going to feel, then allow for some time. The concertina effect is not going to go away, and it's quite possible that either your mood will go up and down, all the stages of your business will go up and down. Allow for that. Give yourself some time and space. And as we go through the next few weeks, you might very well find your head will clear, or it will seem more obvious to you what you need to do. Share that plan, get some input and advice, and I'll be back in another couple of weeks to add another phase or another video. And by all means, if I can do anything to help you, please do get in touch. Take care of yourself.